Welcome to Plot Recon, where thrillers get tactical. I'm your host, Evan Grover. Today I'm joined by B.E. Miller, an American horror author, U.S. Army veteran, and former session musician and producer. A lifelong fan of the horror genre, Miller channels what he calls his horror brain into raw, unapologetic stories of monsters, madness, and the battle for good and evil. With 10 novels through Raven Tail Publishing and more than 300 manuscripts waiting in the wings, he's built a catalog fueled by restless creativity. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man, it's good to have you on. So, for full disclosure, we were talking about this before the podcast. We actually went to elementary school together and graduated high school, um, and then life moved on. And Brad joined the army, I joined the Navy, and we really haven't talked a whole lot since then.
Actually, you're the reason I picked up writing again. I'd had it on a shelf for several years, but then remember we had a conversation and you said I should go for it, and I did. And once I turned it on, I cannot turn it off.
That's the way it is. You can be out walking on the beach or doing something at work, or and it's always there. It's all how's the story going to progress? What are my characters doing? Um, and it's hard to turn it off once it's there.
But it's kind of weird because, once I'm never really anywhere else completely. I'm always thinking of something in the background about what I'm going to write next, the next story, the next idea, the next concept. Sometimes I'll be watching a show on television and an idea comes from something that I see, and I'm like, wow, look at that. Maybe I could take that and instead of doing what they've done, do this instead and try to make it unique because as authors, that's what we really try to do. You don't want to write the same stuff that somebody else has done. I hear a lot in the horror community about people talking about repeat movies, like part one, part two, part three, part four. How many of these horror movies are they really going to make? I try to avoid that same trope. I try to make sure that if I'm going to do something, first of all, it's going to be unique, or it's not even worth the time of trying to get it published because then it's going to fall into that category of being like everything else. I don't want to do that. That's the only reason I really took this up because I've had those conversations with people. They're like, man, I've seen that 1,000 times or I've read that already. Well, let's try to do something different with it, have a little bit of fun in the process. Is it always perfect? No, but it's not supposed to be. I could sit around and spend 10 years working on one novel. It'll never be perfect. I try to get an idea out there. That way, somebody hopefully would appreciate it.
And that's the key. Is just you got to get the work out there to people who want to read it. And so, what was your process? You got picked up by Raventail pretty quick.
Yeah, actually, what happened was I sent them a few concepts, and actually they came back and said, well, um, originally it was three drafts, um, and the one they liked the best was the first Bigfoot series that I put out, which I didn't even have completed at the time that I sent them. It was just first chapter, and then it just kind of went from there. I told them, hey, I said, the same thing I'm saying here. It's going to be unique. That's what I want more than anything.
So, are they giving you that creativity and the license to do what you want?
Uh, they feature or they do a lot of creature horror based um, publishing. So anything within that arena is where I stay when I publish with them,
Okay.
or at least try to anyway.
Yeah. Um, so we talked about this real quick before the show started. You're looking to branch out into self-publishing and write some new stories.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, it's nothing against Raventail and what they do, and like I said, they focus primarily on creature horror. But I want to be able to expand and maybe tell some other things out there. I've got a bunch of manuscripts laying around that have just been collecting dust that I haven't done anything with, and it doesn't necessarily fit their brand of publishing. So why not expand a little bit and try to get that out there? It only makes sense, right? Creativity.
Absolutely. And then, the more work you have out there, the more read through you'll have. Especially if you get onto Amazon, you get people keyed into your what you're doing, the work you're putting out there, and you'll garner a big following, and that's the key is to get paid for doing your work.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you work out these stories? Do you have a plot that you do you plot it all out? Do you just write down the ideas as they come to mind, or they beamed in from outer space, or whatever horror genre you're pulling from?
Uh, Normally, what happens is it might start with a simple idea, and then from there, I try to construct an outline. From the outline, then I start to build the chapters. Um, and then, of course, the frustrating part of trying to clean it all up, edit it, make sure that you've got enough detail, make sure that the plot is correct, make sure that from start to finish everything is, linear in the process. But inspiration can come from anywhere. I've had novels that I had a novel that I wrote from a dream, 70,000 words in a month. I just had that idea. I'm like, wow. I woke up and I wrote it down, and I went right to work on it. There it was.
Nice. That's always amazing when that idea strikes, and then like we said earlier, just it's always there with you, and you're always kicking it over, and it's great to get it down on paper and see it come to fruition.
Right.
Yeah. How you're into music, and does the rhythm and the flow and the mood and tone from the music cross over into your writing?
Yeah, I find that with horror, like when I spend my middle of the night writing sessions, because I do most of my writing at night. It depends on the type of music that I'm listening to, definitely. So, Ozzy Osbourne, of course, passed away recently, but I can't tell you how many times I've put on some of his music to write some of the horror, and it just opens up the floodgates for me and makes it a little easier to flow. Artists like, Zach Wild, Black Label Society, uh, big fan of his music as well. So it really helps get the writing on paper for me.
So if you're writing at night, do you have to keep the lights on, or do you look up and see, creatures in the shadows?
Oh no, I write with the lights out. The only glow is the monitor. And then, yeah, I'll sit around the room and think, well, what if I do this? Maybe I should do that, And then, of course, it's the part of you write a paragraph, it's like, well, that isn't quite what I'm looking for. You go back and delete, and then, of course, have to sit and think a little bit about it and try to uh, find a way to rewrite it so that it's a little more unique. Because, like I said, I don't like to do it if it's already been done, which is very hard when there's so many authors out there. There's so many published works. Trying to keep it unique is definitely difficult.
It is difficult. They say that there's only like seven basic plot lines in all the world, and we just try to mold our story into one of those plot lines.
Right.
Yeah. So, um, how do you really focus on not overusing those tropes and genres? Do you just keep rewriting, or do you have some sort of formula that you're looking for?
Well, the interesting thing is, I've always been a fan of horror. I mean, I can remember even as a kid, when it was the first time I saw The Exorcist. I mean, it scared me to death, And then, of course, all of the Stephen King movies, Children of the Corn. I mean, I grew up in the country, grew up next to a cornfield. I did not want to look at the cornfield, didn't want to go out in the cornfield, stayed away from it for the entire summer. So then, of course, as time went on, you got to figure I've got a large file of movies that I've watched, books that I've read over the years, and you kind of get an idea. Like you said, there's only seven plots that authors tend to use or in the world. Well, I see that in film. I see that when I read, and I try to avoid that right there and say, well, what if I take this instead and make it out of the box and do something different with it because you try, like I said, you really try to avoid that to keep it unique. And if I can't keep it unique, then what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. What's your method for balancing the gore and the violence with, building the psychological tension?
Well, for me, I try to rely on my editor for that because I tend to write with a heavy hand. So for me, I'm going to put it in there, even if it's right on the line or over the line, and let my editor figure out what they think is good to publish, what works and what doesn't work. Because if you leave it up to me, it would be very heavy-handed. And of course, at times I've had my editor come back and say, "Are you sure you really want to write that?" I'm like, okay, well, we can go back and change and modify and kind of work around that and still make it fit into the story.
So is it more? Are your stories more gore and violence, or is there that really psychological build to the to that end point of violence?
Well, with any horror, I didn't want it to be strictly like what they call splatter. Um, so on the surface is all the blood, gore, violence, but underneath, if you read beyond all of that, there's actually a lot of psychological stuff going on. Like I've got a character in one of the novels that was a serial killer, but he doesn't even fit in the framework of the rest of the story. But his backstory is, well, how did he become the serial killer? And throughout the series, it's a series of three novels. You kind of get an idea of how all that happened, child abuse, etc. Um, but it still fits within his character fits within the gore and violent portion of it. That's his connection. But then, of course, the backstory is, if you get that far into it, some people, and that's the interesting thing. Then we get into the conversation about audience. Some people only read on the surface, and that's it. It's to them, it's, oh, this is all I see. But if you really dig into a lot of it, there's a lot of layers to it, and that's how I try to write. I try to make it the complete roller coaster, not just what's on the surface. If you only look for what's on the surface, you're going to miss the entire thing, which does happen. I had one, and this is funny. You talk about audiences and reviews. I had one review where somebody said, uh, you know, uh, "What are you going to do in your next novel?" Or "What are you going to? I'm surprised you didn't kill any kittens in this novel." Because everybody else gets killed in this novel. Sure enough, so what did I do? I went back in the next novel and I killed kittens just because I read that review. I'm like, okay, but I did it in a way where it was a nod to that first of all, and it was kind of um, once again one of those layers. There's a meaning behind that. It's not just about the kittens; it's about the whole setting, the character, and what's actually happening. But how many people, once again, you don't really, nobody really knows. We can't predict how far readers are going to actually get into the nuts and bolts of it, or how deep their um, comprehension is when it comes to the different layers.
Yeah, I find that some of the best stories have multiple storylines in it. Yeah, you have that um, the horror, the blood and gore element, but you also have that psychological component, and then you might have a side story going on with between some other characters, and I think it helps draw the reader in, and especially if you can put um, you know some sort of real life story that happened to you or your personal uh, feelings into it, and it seems to draw the readers in a little bit more.
Right.
Yeah. So how much is your writing based on personal experience? Are you drawing from um, just your brain? Or are you drawing from like army and music and you know high school and all the horror and from the cornfield?
So it's interesting because um, some of the stuff that ends up in the novel is actual, in some of the published works, some of the things from previous life experience. Like, yeah, I have some things from high school in there. It's funny because I had, a friend of mine read one of the novels, and immediately they sent me a message that says, "Oh my gosh, that is right from high school. I remember that happening." But I, but I took it and I wrote it in a way where you can't even, to the average reader, they're not going to know. But, like I said, it's just life experiences, some of the multiple influences, I guess would be the best way to say it, because from, some is life experience, some is um, just listening to music or whatever inspires me to write. I mean, I'm the type of guy that, I'll even go to the grocery store and I'm never really in the grocery store. My brain is thinking of, you sit down and you go to a restaurant and the ideas pop in your head. You're in the grocery store and you're never really there. Like while everybody's talking in the, the shopping aisles, you're thinking of horror. And it's really weird because I would hate to uh, have to see some of the other, the other shoppers to look inside my brain while I'm actually trying to shop to see what I'm really thinking about. But hey, it's a curse. That's the thing. I can't. It's just like music. I can't turn it off. I've tried over the years, but it's one of those things that I'm stuck with.
Yeah, it would make it.
Creativity.
Yeah, that might make a good book. You're walking down the aisle, and then suddenly what you're imagining suddenly starts happening in the grocery store.
I do have an idea for that that's actually sitting around. Something similar. Um, the character's actually dead and doesn't know it. So
Okay.
everything that he's always wanted to come true, everything he's always wanted to come true in life is actually happening. Finally. But it's all a test because he's really in purgatory, and it's the decider of whether he goes to heaven or hell. So, are you going to make good decisions in purgatory and treat people right, or are you going to be that bad person? So he ends up turning, of course, on the dark side of things, and wants to get revenge on people that never really treated him right. He's got the neighbor he can't stand. He's got, all of these things going on. The ex-wife, all of these elements, and he does some very heinous things to all of these people. Come to find out, the whole thing's a test. He was dead the whole time and didn't know it.
That's crazy. I wouldn't mind reading that book. That sounds good.
I, and that's just how it happens. I just come up with these ideas. I'll have meetings with my publisher, and they'll say, "Hey, well, what do you think about this? Can you do this?" 5 minutes later, I'm back in email saying, "Here's the idea right here," and that's just how it happens. It's weird how my brain works.
Hey, but that's that great thing about creativity is that those ideas seem like they're just beamed from some other dimension into our head, and um, I I don't know how you said you're a plotter and I'm a pantser. My characters will talk to me and tell me what's going on and decide how the story's going to flow. Is that something that happens with your stories?
Yeah, I mean, you try to, of course, I rely a lot on characters and dialogue to move the story along. So you almost have to put yourself in that character's position. Whether it's the hero, the villain, the even with creature horror, what do you really want this creature to do? How do you want this creature to interact with people? Most of my novels, well, all of the creature based novels are all more about the people and the things that the people around the creature do that are bad versus the creature itself. Because I don't like the old trope of, oh my gosh, the monster's coming out of the woods, look at the monster's scary. No, wait a minute, what are the people doing while the monster is being scary? Because remember, people do a lot of crazy bad things, and that is really what I usually try to focus on. I just use the creature as an added portion of it to add that certain element of horror.
Okay. Um, so if you're adding that in that horror, I mean, to get into a bad guy mindset is, I think we just think about all the bad stuff we could really do and get away with and enjoy. So is that how you're thinking about bad guys in general, or what your creatures do?
Well, anymore for some of the bad guys. I mean, you can't even turn on the news anymore without seeing something really crazy. You know, I always say that the real horror is real life. What I write is fiction. Because and that's you see it all the time. Read the newspaper, and a lot of the things that um, I incorporate are just things that actually people are really capable of, and I try to articulate that in my writing because That's the world we live in, and why not incorporate that? Why not make the characters as authentic as possible to real life? Of course, the creature. I mean, I wrote a Bigfoot series, and of course, there's a debate: is Bigfoot real or isn't it? Um, but it's not to date, not really proven, not really tangible. So you're taking this intangible thing, putting it in the world of people, and these people are flawed and doing bad things. And oh, by the way, there's a Bigfoot.
Yeah, Bigfoot is a great protagonist because you can have a lot of fun with it, uh,
Yeah.
and it's yeah. So how do you really developing on this the writing portion of it? What's your writing process like? You said you write at night. Are you writing pretty much every day, or you um, and how does that key in with Raven? Are they handling your advertising and your all your publicity?
Yeah, all day. So I do all of my writing primarily at night. I do write nightly, the mid hours of the morning from right, for 3 a.m. beyond, um, until the sun comes up usually, and maybe sometimes later on. But as far as Raven Tail goes, they handle all the editing, publishing. They've been very good. I have a great relationship with them. Um, the editing, of course, there's a lot of back and forth with editing. Like I said, I tend to write heavy-handed because, in order to be unique, sometimes you got to do that. Like, and I'll use The Exorcist as a perfect um, uh, description of that. When that movie first came out, people were getting sick in the theaters. People were walking out of the theaters. you know, I still want to create that authentic element of horror. I don't believe that if you're gonna write a horror novel, for me anyway, if I'm gonna write a horror novel, it's got to be something that is going to take people on that roller coaster ride. That's what I want. I don't want it to be vanilla. I don't want it to be plain. I don't want it to be cookie cutter. I want it to be something that you're going to read and be like, oh my god, I can't believe that that's actually in there. Sometimes that's a little too much for the average reader. Sometimes. Now I've had readers that totally get it. They get all of the elements. They get the people doing bad things. They get the creature. They're like, oh, I understand. They get the flawed people doing very bad things. And the hero portion of it. I like to, have fun with the hero in the story. Well, is the hero actually going to survive the horror or not? Sometimes that doesn't always happen because not everybody uh, successful as far as the hero in my writing. I mean, I even, in Bigfoot, I had, the resolution was coming in the end of the series, and you thought the hero was going to be successful right until the very end, and it didn't happen.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we're not always successful in making the hero the the resolution of the story because sometimes there's forces at work. Like I write about the CIA a lot, and you're that's just one organization you're not going to turn on a dime, and there's no great resolution for things that happened to you know in the past or coming out of it. And I'm sure that like Bigfoot, you know, he's going to walk back into the woods and everybody's going to live another day, right?
Right. So that whole Bigfoot thing is funny. Go ahead and talk about where inspiration comes from. Remember the movie Harry and the Hendersons?
Yeah.
So, so that, they hit Bigfoot with a car. They take Bigfoot home. The whole family loves Bigfoot, and he's fuzzy and friendly, and he builds a relationship with the people, right? So I watched that. I think I was actually flipping through the channels, and it was on, and I watched a portion of it, and I thought to myself, now what would happen if it was the other way around? What happens if the people actually knew about Bigfoot, but the people were flawed that know about Bigfoot, and Bigfoot is trying to live and exist in their world with all of their flaws, and ends up as a creature, as the protagonist, gets itself in some very bad situations just for the sake of friendship. I mean, you're Bigfoot. You got to be lonely, living in the woods by yourself, right? So because it's kind of weird. You see all of these sightings and alleged photographs, but nobody really knows about it. There's nobody. What if somebody actually does know about it? And uh, the events that unfold around it are very nefarious.
Well, that factors back into that CIA um, cover up type thing. Um, did we invent this creature? Is it a an amalgam of human DNA and an ape or something like that? Um,
Hmm.
so that's so you writing about that kind of stuff. That I mean, that's a whole different genre for me. I don't really write horror, but I would think that you know I think horror is still in the thriller genre because it still carries that you know kind of investigative plot line through the books. And so to find those niches that your readers come through, are you really kind of focusing on certain areas, or are you just trying to find an umbrella of all the horror that you can possibly write to bring in an audience?
The interesting thing is, like I said, I've got a bunch of ideas just laying around. I mean, I just mentioned an idea during this interview, and that's just how it works. I mean, I've got so I just try to work through the list and get it all out there in the market. Some of it is creatures, some of it is not. Some of it is a little more heavy-handed, some is a little more mainstream. It just depends on how it all fits in the story. Like I mean, in reference to music, it's the same thing. If you audition for a drummer and you got a drummer that's a metal drummer and you're in a country band, it's not going to work out. So you obviously try to um, have varying degrees of like in a cover band, varying degrees of music that you play to accommodate everybody, and that's it's varying degrees of horror for me. That's what works. I like. I mean, I wrote a thriller that Benny. It's about I sat down and read this article about this kid that had died, and he came back, of course, and he says, "Oh my gosh, I saw the pearly gates, and I saw heaven, and I saw angels, and I saw Jesus." Okay, so I sat down and that was the one that I wrote in a month, and I really thought about it. Like, I wonder how we could turn that into a horror novel. Of course, with my horror brain, make it something unique. So, of course, when the kid comes back, they revive him. He wasn't supposed to survive. He comes back with half a soul. So at the same time, half of the soul returns to this child. The other half of the soul is born into somebody else. So where this kid has had nothing but bad luck from that point on his entire life, the other half of the soul um, is filled with darkness because he's got a hole he can never fill. So he uses that and he does some very heinous things to people along the way. And of course, since the two of them share the same soul, eventually they're going to meet. And when they do, it's crazy. But that's not exactly creature horror. That is a thriller type horror. So it just depends on what works, what interests me, I guess, the most, what story I want to tell. Well, I've got so many of them. I really do.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about moving into the self-publishing aspect of it is that you can bring all those stories to light, where you're not, kind of focused completely on creature horror. Have you thought about how you're going to position yourself brand-wise going forward with that new venture?
Yeah, I mean, I've got it all worked out. I've just got to get to the point of getting it all put together. And of course, I'm still writing. I've got two horror novels that are finished waiting. I've got a third series that I'm working on. And it seems like uh, there's never enough time to get all of this done. So you have to mark it on the calendar and hope that it sticks. That's the nice thing about the venture for myself or for the new publishing company. It's kind of fluid. Is it going to be January 26th? Is it going to be February 26th? Well, we'll just kind of wait and see how it all comes together. As for right now, it's going to be next year
Yeah.
sometime.
Yeah. Are you do you have like a business plan going forward? You said you had it laid out. Is do you have a business plan? You know what you're going to start a website. How are you going to market the books?
I'm going to go through all of the normal steps as far as, setting up the website, um, seeking some marketing, of course, and trying to get the brand out there. But really, at the end of the day, what it boils down to is all of these releases that I have sitting around that are just collecting dust that I haven't done anything with, putting those in the marketplace to draw some attention. That's
Yeah.
primarily going to be the main part of the plan because all of this stuff is not doing me any good just sitting around. I've got about 300 laying around, and and a lot of them are in various stages. Like some of them might just be, a couple pages. Some of them might be a chapter. Some of them might be almost finished. But a lot of them are ideas that, if I don't get it done, I never will. And the weird thing of it is, I come up with a couple new ideas a week. It's like, man, I gotta get some of this backlog cleared out of here, or else it's never going to see the light day.
Yeah.
You ever watch that TV show? You ever watch the TV show Hoarders, right?
Yeah.
You know, they go into people's houses and you see all of this stuff that they've accumulated and their living conditions. Well, that's what I'm worried about. And in another 20 or 30 years, they're going to come into my writing room and they're going to find a bunch of guitars and a bunch of unfinished manuscripts. You know, so at least the guitars I'm not so worried about, but the manuscripts I would at least say, you know what, I've done something with them that rather than just letting them sit around.
Yeah. That's getting them out there in front of the public is the best way for them to find them um and to put some money in your pocket because that's the whole key. I mean, beyond the love of writing, it's trying to make some money on the back end. And
Well, and that's a big part of it. I don't think that people in general understand the amount of work that goes into it, because you never really leave it. Uh, you talk about, the long hours writing. I mean, on the weekends when I'm, not tied up doing anything else, it's, 10 or 12 hours a session. It's 3 o'clock in the morning with very little sleep. It's, then you think you got it, and then it goes to the editor for two and three times and comes back. You're like, oh, I can't believe I missed that one word, or I can't believe I missed this or that. That's the frustrating part of it. And then, of course, no sooner than you get that project done, then you've got the next one just staring at you saying, come on, let's get on the next one. And it's a never ending cycle. And I've been writing now solid for ed publishing for about 3 years. And that's all I've done with a lot of my free time. And it's but you got to have a love for it. And of course, I've been pretty much smiling through this whole interview because I could talk about horror all day long. I enjoy what I do with it. It's a lot of fun. I've done some things, and of course, sometimes I launch projects that maybe didn't turn out the way I had expected. At the time, it seemed like a great idea. You publish it, and you're like, oh, I missed that one. I could have really done something different with that. But that's all part of it. Like I said, I don't want to wait 10 years to get one novel done and check all the boxes. Oh, hey, look at me. I did one novel in 10 years. No, I'm trying to get these ideas out to market. And at the end of the day, either, readers are going to like it or they're not. But regardless of that, it's on to the next one.
yeah, I think that you have to treat it like a job. Um, when you sit down to write, you're focused on that. Then you have all the advertising and the website maintenance and the all the other things that go into it. It's really a job, and I
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you see it, but when I started coming in, the big thing was to give away a free novella or a free book to get people onto a website, and you know you know how many hours it takes to write a book. I'm suddenly giving it away for free, and something that people might not ever read. They just grab it and put it on their reading list, and it kind of frustrates me because people expect that from us, and they don't like. Oh well, you wrote a book. I should get it to read it for free, and I'm like, I I on the other end feel like I should get paid for my work, but I think it's an aspect that
Right.
I think we're seeing it change a little bit, but it's still pretty prevalent, and giveaways and 99-cent books and the cheap. I think it cheapens our work, but people expect it.
Well, that's the interesting thing. It's not that much different than music. You know, the whole industry. I mean, I carry Spotify around and listen to that, and I don't think about, you know, I mean, you pay your subscription and that's it. But think of all the artists out there that are trying to make it that rely on that or rely on album sales. You know, most bands don't even produce albums anymore because they make all their money from touring. It's the whole industry has changed. I mean, it's a lot different from the days of big record companies, and it's the same anything with creativity now. It's all transformed into exactly what you're talking about. It's really weird, and it's a little unnerving because you're right. We do put a lot of work into all this stuff. You know, years ago I put a lot of work into all the music that I was producing, and people expect it to be, 99 cents free. Download this, read this, listen to this. What do you mean I got to pay for it? Well, it's not exactly easy to make all of this happen. And the only reason I do it is because I enjoy it. It's not really, I don't sit down and I can't honestly tell you the last time I logged in to look at where my sales were because I'm always too busy writing because I enjoy that portion of it the most. I would never be a good um, marketer uh, without assistance as well. Hats off to Raventail because they managed to take care of all that for me, so I just want to sit down and focus on the writing portion because to me that's the most important. Everything else, I'll leave that to somebody else. I wish
Well,
the editor liked me a little more. I mean, but
well, I think we always have a love-hate relationship with editors because we know our work and we kind of bled for that work, and then the editor comes in with a red pen and just crosses it all out, and you're like, what? But why? Why did you take that out? It was so important to the story. And
right.
and then like a day later, you'll go, oh yeah, they're right. So it's it's just that relationship of with striking the fine balance between what they perceive as the correct way to tell the story and how we want to tell it.
I've done some work with Susie over at Rendell Press, and her and I have a lot of conversations about publishing. She has read a lot of my material. She's edited a lot of my material. She's helped me through a lot of it. We've had a lot of horror-based conversations. She says, well, maybe the audience may not warm up to this. The audience may not like that. Maybe you should consider doing this. I'm like, I know, but I like that scene. That makes it work right there. That may be a little too much. Once again, trying to reel it back in a little bit. At the end of the day, she's like, it's your choice if we want to leave that in there to see what happens. But, you might want to consider doing A, B, and C instead to try to make it more palpable for the average reader, which is weird because growing up in the '80s, a lot of the horror was a lot more heavy-handed than what it is now. People get upset about watching like the Saw movies or all 16 or 20 of them, however many of them they put out there. But it's like, really, do you remember some of the stuff that came out in the '70s, like The Thing, '80, The Omen, you know, Hellraiser. I love the Hellraiser movie. A lot of that stuff would never fly now, but I'm trying to keep that horror component intact because that's it for me right there. Uh, I don't know. It just seems like the average readership has changed a little bit.
Well, I think we see that through the eyes of our uh, social stuff, social justice, and DEI, and uh, trying to be politically correct. Even like the Scream movies, I don't know if you really consider them horror or comedy, but most of those stuff can be made anymore because of the raunchy jokes and the comedy.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean that. I don't I don't worry about uh, the approach of how I write things because I mean I grew up in the '80s. I don't get offended by things. I
Yeah.
put it on paper and that's it. And nowadays it's hard to get that across. But the interesting thing is, some of the shows on TV um, are a lot worse than what I'm writing, and I can't understand the disconnect there. You know, you're going to watch this amount of gore or this amount of horror on television and not bat an eye, but yet you're going to worry about, a good example would be I love the Game of Thrones stuff. Um, you watch it on, I watched it on HBO when the series was out, and that is, you got your sex, gore, violence, plot, thriller. It's all in there, and overwhelmingly, people watch that and they enjoy it. But don't put it on paper. To me, that is a bit puzzling. I'm like, what do you mean you're going to get offended by reading it, but you're going to sit down and watch it on TV? Look at all the weird stuff in the Saw movies. People getting their limbs cut off and put in these weird situations. People loved it, but don't write it. How does that equate? I don't necessarily understand. Once again, it's a very challenging market to be in. It's a very challenging time to be creative, and anybody that does it, has all my respect, because it's not easy for us. But it's no reason to give up. It's no reason to stop. But eventually, you hope that you build your audience. You hope that people turn around and realize, oh wow, look at this. Look at what is actually being created here. Time will tell, I guess.
Yeah, it's there's movies and books are, you know, different because they're a different audience. There are people out there who will read the book and then watch the movie and go, "That absolutely sucked. Never want to watch that again because the book was better." And then you have people who have never read the book and they don't understand um, some of the concepts are in the book. It's a different audience, I think, and that's why maybe the if we watch it, it's a different than reading it. I don't know, but it's the audience and how they react to the work, and you want people to buy your work and enjoy it, um, and I think that even I know that I don't always put stuff in my books because I think, well, I think my mom's going to read this, and I don't know if she wants to read to read about this stuff. So, but there are fine lines where even you know uh, you know people want a clean read and you can't curse in a book, but they don't care if people get killed, but you can't curse in the book. So I imagine it's the
Right.
same way with horror.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's, which I don't understand because, like I said, people will watch it on TV, they'll watch it in a movie, but don't put it on paper. But that's, you try to tell the story once again. If I spend a lot of my writing based on the world around me, based on what I see on television, based on how people really are, you know, I mean, unless you live in a cave somewhere or out in the middle of nowhere by yourself, you live long enough, you see exactly how people are. And I try to put that in the story. That I try to weave that in there. Like this is reality. This is fiction. The creature is the fiction. The reality is how people really are. And unfortunately, a lot of times people they it's too reflective. I think because people look at it and think, my gosh, is the world really that bad? Are people really that bad? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. If you live long enough, you realize that.
I mean, all you have to do is turn on the television and you see uh, rioters
Yeah.
and sex trafficking and murder, and so it's not. People always ask me where do you
Yep.
get your ideas from, and I'm like, don't you ever watch TV? Read a newspaper.
Right.
It's
Oh,
all right
right.
there. It's just it's right for the picking. It's just how you tell the story, and it. But it all brings it. Just putting it out there for people to see in a different format, and um, is I don't know. It's fun to write about this stuff and be creative and just bring it to people and let them see what we can do.
Yep.
Yeah,
Challenging but fun. That's for sure.
yeah, yeah. So are you holding down a day job too, or are you just writing at
Yes.
night?
Yes. Yeah. I'm not a
Okay.
full time. Yeah. Writing when I can. Yeah. Writing is definitely not to the point where that's what I'm doing all the time. It's just on the side. But
Yeah.
it's, one of those hobbies that one of those interests that I have, and I have to do something with it. I can't just leave it sit there. And, for a long time, it was the same thing with music. Um, recorded on the side, played in bands, produced music. all on the side while still maintaining a full-time career, which is another challenge. When you're out there working 50, 60 hours a week, and then on top of that, trying to put these novels together, and then hope for the best. But I've got such a system down now that I do pretty well with it. I try to fit it in whatever I can.
Yeah, that's the key is just keep putting the words on paper and making sure that you meet the deadline for the next release.
I love my phone because I've got my Word right on my phone. So then in my downtime, wherever I find it, whether I'm passenger seat in the car, whether I'm just sitting down with a cup of coffee, whatever, I could start putting these ideas down before I go in and actually sit in front of the computer and start hashing things out and outlining. Um, but it's been a big help. I do a lot of writing on the phone, a lot of writing. Technology, that's the one thing that's been a big help. You couldn't have done that maybe 10 years ago, but now it's very easy. The only thing is the small keyboard sometimes gets me. Thank God for autocorrect in most cases.
Yeah.
Sometimes it puts things in there that I didn't even intend, and I look at it like I didn't write that. Where did that come from? No, I don't want to use that word. Stop inserting things.
Or you look at it and go, "What did I write? What did I intend to say there?" Because it changes, and then you can't remember what you were writing. So,
Yeah.
but but so I'm gonna ask you the last question I ask everybody on when it comes on the podcast. Um, what do you want readers to take most from your work? What is the one feeling or um, aspect that you want them to see in your work?
When they finally get to the last page, I want the I did not expect that. To me, that's more important than anything. As they turn the pages, wow, I can't believe that actually happened. I didn't expect that. That's what you do it for. I don't, like I've said before, I don't do this to be uh, a copy of what's already out there. As hard as that is, I try to keep it unique. And that's the only reason I decided to do this because once again, I got tired of, having conversations or going to the theater and watching a horror movie or reading a book or a magazine article that's horror based and it'd be like, I've seen this already or I've read this already. And I'm like, wow, this is just, uh, what would I do differently? Well, this is me trying to do something different. And of course, sometimes I've got ideas where I'll write it out or come up with a draft and I'll be like, nope, that's not good enough. And that goes, right into the trash, as opposed to trying to find that one unique thing that, really, really tells the story and puts it in a unique perspective that hopefully somebody can take that from it.
Awesome. And that's what we want. We want people to be thrilled when they reach the last page and they say, "Doggone, this book is over. I want to keep reading." So, well, that's
Yeah.
a wrap for this
We
episode
hope
of
that you
Plot
think.
Recon. Yeah, we're a big thanks to B.E. Miller for pulling back the curtain on the discipline, chaos, and relentless creativity behind his horror novels and showing how real life experience can shape the page. If you're ready to dive into his work, start with The Writhing or The Beast Beyond the Hills and see how he blends raw imagination with relentless pacing. You can find his books wherever you get your horror. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow Plot Recon, share it with a friend, and leave a review. It helps bring more deep dive conversations with people who are making thrillers tactical. I'm Evan Graver. Thanks for listening. Stay sharp, write hard, and keep your fiction tactical.